card and what the small group on Saturday together decided should be in there. The small group was just me, Jess, Waldo, and Sherilyn. And I got some comments from others online, but we tried to digest that all into this. And the idea, again, is that this is going to be what we take back out to communities. Okay, so we've canvassed communities, we found out what their priorities are. We started that process back in the 2012 election cycle. We've continued that. You guys have been a part of that through today. So we know for a handful of communities at a pretty deep level what issues they think are important. So we want to report back to those communities on what their legislator did on those issues this past legislative session. So here's what the group thought should be in the report card. The first is, of course, we should recap what the community's priorities were. So we have issue clouds for 5 or 6 different communities. This is an example I'm using just for Manoa. What they said was important in the 2012 election cycle. So that'll be the one component of the report card. Will include that. A second component, you might remember if you were here at the last fellows meeting, that we were sort of debating on what's the fairest way to actually represent a legislator's work or their interests during the 2013 session. And we debated about looking at their votes on bills, looking at bills that were further along the legislative process. What we decided on was to take the bills that they introduced. Because there's no arguing that, well, I voted this way or that way because someone changed the bill down the line. It's a bill they signed their name to at the beginning. So we'll take a look at all the bills they introduced, and we thought interesting way to analyze the bills that they introduced was to take the bill summaries for all the bills they introduced and feed it into the same issue cloud, word cloud generator that we use to come up with the community priorities.
Are those bills, any bill that their name was on, regardless of whether or not they were the first person?
They don't have to be the primary introducer. As long as they signed on as an introducer, we assume that they backed the bill at the beginning, as it was written at the beginning.
And does that get around anybody who might have introduced a bill for somebody else? Is that something that happens to
Yeah. I don't know. It's an open question for the group as to whether we should exclude that or not. I mean, if you introduce a bill for somebody else, like, you know, a representative will introduce a bill as part of the governor's package, should that representative still be accountable for what they introduced? I kind of think they should be. If they're going to sign their name to it and add themselves as an introducer, kick off the legislative process with it, but we can come back to that question afterwards. So this cloud here is what the Manoa community said. Isaac Choi, who represents that community, this is a cloud of all the bills that he introduced. Okay? And so it gives you kind of a visual basis for comparing the community's priorities and what the legislator actually worked on.
Can you make it a little bit bigger, James?
I'm gonna go through this pretty quick.
Okay. So
if you can't see all this, that's okay, because I'm gonna go into some detail here. We also want to make note of the success rate of bills. So Isaac Choi introduced 84 bills at the beginning of the session. 9 crossed over. So 9 made it all the way through his chamber, the House, and went over to the Senate for consideration. That doesn't say how many bills became law because we don't know yet. Okay, session just ended today.
What is that going to be compared to the average?
Yeah, we got to calculate the average for everybody. So probably one of us will do that, but if we can get some help just tallying up the success rate on bills.
Is that going to be the average of just the 9 people we look at, or the average?
No, average of everybody. Average of everybody. Short form bills, those are bills that have no content to them, so legislators will introduce these bills at the beginning of session without any substance in them, just with a title, so that later on they can go and insert stuff into them. We wanted to sort of track that too. I'm not sure all this will end up in the final report card, but I think they're interesting things to gather to give us a picture of what these legislators' performance is like. Short form bills to me are an indication that either something is not all the way thought through, or they know that they want to slide something in later on in session. So I thought it'd be an interesting thing to note. It doesn't take a lot of time to collect it. You just look at the bill titles and you can tell. Fifth, and this is probably the centerpiece, really critical, something Olin suggested last time, was we should ask legislators. So I'll show you guys in a second a very simple template for asking legislators about a handful of key bills that relate back to the community priorities and some issues or bills that we identify as hot topics, like the bills we've been tracking this session. But we'll do a questionnaire on that. We'll include their top campaign donors, and I'll show you the link to that. And then finally, the scorecard should be an infographic form, we felt like. both something we can hand out at the door in graphic form and something we can publish and share online in graphic form. Now again, this is the backbone for what we want to collect on legislators. I don't know that all of it will end up in graphic form or in the handout at the door, but I think this will give us a complete picture of legislators' performance. Yeah.
Is there gonna be any kind of score for them, or is this more of a?
It's a good question. I couldn't come up with a way to score it or give them a grade just based on this. And I thought this was kind of the limit of what we could pass out at the door or share online that people would actually take the time to digest.
I think again, like, it's more up to people to kind of gauge it. Like, it keeps it more unbiased if you just give them the facts. Like, because different people would have different opinions on issues and stuff. So how can you say if it's a good thing if you introduce like this bill or that bill?
Well, it's actually, I mean, it is actually really tough to come up with a fair and accurate way to assess their performance. And a big part of that is that a lot of the decision making that happens is not on public record, and a lot of the ways bills move forward or get held back is not on the public record. And so, you know, you might gather behind the scenes intelligence from someone that says, oh, Senator so-and-so held it up because they decided not to hear it because they have this big campaign donor. But unless you're going to put that hearsay into a graphic and hand it out, and then be willing to take the consequences of that, there's not really a fair and legitimate way to evaluate performance, you know, other than what we've got here. I think this is the best we've got in terms of what we can produce that is back to publicly available information.
So to Julia's question, I wonder if it's misleading if we call it a scorecard, is the reader gonna be like, so what's the score? So should we call it like a performance report?
Yeah.
Performance review?
Yeah, maybe that's better. Performance review, I like that.
James, are there, I don't know the answer to this, but each lawmaker has his or her own budget to manage his or her own office, right? Are there performance indicators there?
That I don't know. I think we can look at that too.
It's gonna depend, like, right, like if they're committee chair.
They get more money?
Right, or
Yeah.
they're in leadership for some reason. So I think it might be problematic if we make assumptions about just the amount of money they have. You know, and some of them have titles for leadership that make you think, well, I have no idea what that is. I mean, if there are 24 Democrats in the Senate, then why do you need a majority whip? Right? And shouldn't the Republican get more money because he's doing everything than every committee? So I think that's going to be too. It's a good question, but.
I'll look into it though, see if there's anything that we can work with. That's a good suggestion. Okay, so you know the second to the last piece of the outline was campaign contributions, and I just wanted to show you what's available here. I think I went over this last time, but followthemoney.org makes it real easy. You can see their top 20 contributors and just cut and paste it or download it as a spreadsheet. And it also breaks it into top 15 industries. And I think, again, we're not at the point yet where we can sort of put it all into visual form, but just to give you guys a taste of where it might lead, I tried to mock up something really simple with just a few components.
Wait, did you make that?
Yeah. So here, this is just, I mean, it literally took me, you know, just a few minutes to make this because this was just cut and pasted directly from that Follow the Money site. So here's his top donors, right? You got labor, and if you broke it down, you'd see public sector unions and private sector unions on top, contractors, finance, insurance, and real estate, lawyers and lobbyists, health, agriculture, etc. So you can compare that, his top donors, to the bills he introduced. And we can put it as a cloud, or we can put it as, you know, a graph of some kind with the most frequently introduced types of bills. But you can see university's big there, that's in his district. But aside from university, the big things that jump out are health benefits, trust fund, tax, employees, and back up to his major contributors are labor unions, finance, insurance, and real estate. Okay, so draw your own conclusions, but you got to ask the question of whether it matches better with this or with this, which was his constituents' priorities.
That's brilliant.
So it's just a visual way. I'm not sure that's how it's going to end up actually on the scorecard. We can talk about that another time. But we'll have the data to work with to produce comparisons like this. Okay. So here's where we could use some immediate help in two areas. One is analyzing the data, analyzing the bills introduced to give us what we need to produce those clouds of that visually illustrate what a legislator introduced at the beginning of session. So I've shared this sheet with you in Google Docs, and you also have a hard copy if you want to take some notes. But what I want to spend the next 10 minutes doing is just walking through the instructions on how we would go about generating and analyzing the data to produce what we saw. Okay, a cloud on the bills introduced. Then the second piece we could use help on is really identifying those handful of key bills that we think are hot topics and relate back to community concerns that we can ask legislators about. And again, this came from Olden's suggestion that we actually, rather than trying to sort through votes on bills, which is very complicated because bills go through so many versions, let's just go back to the legislators and ask them, hey, on this bill, how did you vote and why?
Are we going to check it against your voting record?
Good question. We can. It should be pretty easy to do at that point.
And then are we going to ask it which vote? Crossover, like which part of the process are we looking at to find the vote? Because the only time everybody votes on everything is crossover right now.
I thought we weren't gonna focus on just their vote, but also we asked how did they vote on it and why. So I think if the why could explain.
Well, we could ask the question
You know
in a
what I
different
mean?
way. We could
Maybe
say, what was your
in a way
position on this bill and why? Because I think when we talked about it Saturday, we were saying we should try to pin them down to a yes or no, like a vote, because that's what we did with the candidate questionnaires, as we said, what's your position on this issue?
I mean, you could ask them what their position is, and then you could also provide statistics on if they vote yes or no on it. If you really want to highlight any potential suspicion that they're not doing what they're saying they're going to do.
Yeah, we just didn't want to only ask the position because they could say this is my position, and then we'd have to do the investigating of whether or not they voted. But why not just ask them up front, like, how did you vote and why? I mean, I would hope their position comes out in that way, but maybe there's another way to phrase it so that it focuses in more on where they're at.
And would we be asking their position on a particular bill or on an issue?
Yeah, we were
I think
thinking.
that goes to what Julia was talking about, like bills go through so many iterations and we've gotten replaced, they sometimes become the opposite.
Yep.
So you might have this really complex answer of, oh, I really liked it at first and then it became a monster and I hated it and
Yep.
then it became what it originally was intended to be. So I mean,
So we were going to look for bills that got pretty far.
One really interesting thing to do would be to look at that rate of voting against a bill because it turned into something else. I'd be interested in that, but it might not. I don't think it's appropriate for this kind of condensed piece of information. But maybe one thing you could do would be to ask some follow-up questions and put them on the website, and have more data to flesh this out, and a link on the performance
You know,
review.
my personal feeling is this is the most complicated and least certain in terms of like the output for the report card because of the issues that we're talking about right now. I think it's worthwhile we've identified like maybe 10 issue areas where we want to find a bill that made it far enough so that we can ask people about. I think it's probably a worthwhile exercise to try to figure out what those bills are, and if we have enough of them, and if it's straightforward enough that we can ask somebody what their position was on the bill. I think the fallback is if we find out that's not possible, after we try to research these bills, then we ask them for their review of their own performance on that issue this session. Like, what did you do? What was your biggest success and biggest regret in this issue area, this past session? But I think the feeling of the gang on Saturday was we want to at least try to identify the bills and see if we can make a go of it, and it may turn out that the answer is no.
Maybe crossover is a good place to look at because at that point it's only gone through one house
Mm-hmm.
or one chamber, so there's less likelihood that it's turned into something we didn't want. I mean,
Mhm.
fewer hands have touched it. An amazing number of hands have touched it anyway. So
So-
maybe it's a more accurate representation of the intention of the bill.
So I'm gonna get to sort of, we did say crossover, like bills that actually crossed over. So when I get to that point, jump in and tell me if we're picking it up too early, too late, or it makes sense to do it at a different time. So since I got 5 minutes left, let me go through this piece first, this bills introduced analysis. Okay, now with Waldo's help, who was there on Saturday, we're gonna get essentially a spreadsheet of all the bills introduced by each legislator that we're looking at. Okay, we're gonna get the bill title and a measure description, which is one paragraph of text. That paragraph is a pretty accurate description of what the bill actually is intended to do. We've looked at them. So what we need to do is turn those into the cloud. Now it takes some working with to do that. So anybody that's game to help out on this, the first thing you're going to get is by this weekend, you'll get a spreadsheet that looks something like this. Okay, this is Isaac Choi's spreadsheet. And here's the bill titles, and here is the full description, a paragraph long in a table. Okay, now it needs to be massaged and cleaned up a little bit before it'll actually play well with the word cloud generator. So here's what we need to do. I've got detailed instructions here. I won't go over them in depth because I've shared them with you already. Essentially what we need to do is a couple rounds of cleaning this up, and let me show you what I mean by cleaning this stuff up. So if here is the original from Isaac Choi on all the 84, 86 bills he introduced, and I take all of this and I copy it and I stick it into the word cloud generator at Wordle, which I've had a lot of fun playing with, and it's a great data visualization tool. If I just paste it all into there and I hit go, you're gonna see why this is not why it's not usable to just plug this stuff directly in and run with the graphic that comes out. Okay. So you can see there's words, it automatically takes out some words like and, to, of, the, but there are words in legislation that appear over and over again that of course are giant. So what we need to do is produce this, take a look at it, make a list of words that need to be deleted, and make a list of terms that you know ought to be combined, like if there's schools and education, or in this case, public employee benefits, health benefits, trust fund, those are all separate. And Excel makes it very easy to actually delete these words or replace them. So what you do is you just write down a list of the words that you want to delete and a list of the words that you want to replace, and you go into Excel and you select the whole thing, and you would go replace, and I want to take out all the relating, and let it be replaced by nothing, replace all. We made 86 replacements, and then when I take it, the cleaned up version, and stick it back in. This is after I've actually gone through and cleaned out a bunch of other terms and combined terms.
Press this way.
Uh-oh. Might be freezing on me. Okay. Well, when I clean it up, I get this. Okay? So in the instruction sheet that I've shared with you and what you got in front of you, I actually recommend a couple different rounds. Uh-oh. It's frozen. Okay. I recommended a couple different rounds of cleaning. So here, make a list of terms to delete, make a list of terms to combine, use find and replace in Excel to delete and combine terms. Feed it into Wordle, take another look at it, clean it up one more time, and then if you want, you can play around with the different fonts and layouts in Wordle. This is more for your own, if you want to play with data visualization. It's actually super easy to change. Maybe I won't go back into that just in case it freezes. It's actually super easy to change fonts, layouts, rearrange the words into designs, so you can play with that if you want. And then finally, what we're looking for as the deliverable is you take your cleaned up text here, copy the whole thing, and if you're not familiar with shortcut keys in Excel, Shift, page down, lets you highlight a whole bunch of cells, or Shift arrow down, copy it, and then paste it into this. This template, which I've set up and already shared with you guys. Okay, so we're looking for people to take on a particular legislator. We'll send you the spreadsheet for all their bills. Play with it in Wordle, and then after you've cleaned it up, enter it here. Just paste it in. So this is the one I just went over and pasted it into Isaac Joy's column. And I've got questions here, question marks here next to people that I'm hoping will jump in. This stuff up here don't need to worry about. Number of bills introduced, number of short form bills, bills crossed over, number of bills that actually passed the ledge. Waldo can help us pull that automatically. So you don't have to worry about filling that in. What we really need is just the stuff to feed into the word cloud generator. I think this is just for reference. Here's all the bills he introduced. You can see all the bills he introduced right off of the legislator's page. But we'll send you a spreadsheet with it. It's easier to work with. Okay, that's task area number 1. Task area number 2 is this identifying key bills issue. So the first thing, of course, many of you have been tracking legislation already. So if you feel like it's an important issue, I'll send around a list. I'll include in the instruction sheet online the list of about 10 issue areas. And it goes back to that agenda that we developed at the beginning of session with some suggested bills that one or more of us has been following. But we're looking at probably 10 issues and bills max. And if you're not familiar, if you don't know, if your bill didn't make it far enough and you're looking for something else, like let's pretend that the solar tax credit didn't make it very far in session, although it did, and you were looking for another bill in the energy area, then ask around the fellows, Kanu staff. If you need introductions to advocates, we can make them. But do a little bit of asking around. Once you get a short list of candidate bills, then search for bills by keyword at the Capitol website. Find bills that made it past crossover. And it's really easy to see visually if you just go into the bill, the measure history, and look, you can see here is S, where it was introduced in the Senate, and if you see it get to H, that means it crossed over into the other chamber. Okay, so you can just do a visual scan and say, yep, it crossed over. Browse a testimony to get a sense of the pro and con arguments on that piece of legislation. You don't have to do anything in depth, and you don't have to write anything down on it, just so you yourself know what's behind the legislation. And then we want to enter in on this data collection sheet here, which is here, the key pieces of information. So this is one, it's just an example one that I did on Rail. Did it cross over? Yes. This is the bill number, the latest version. Here's a link I pasted into the bill status, and then a 1-paragraph summary of the bill. Okay. Now the way this is going to be used is, once we identify the bills, we want to plug them into a survey to those 9 legislators that looks like this. So we'll have these short answer responses to our questions on a handful of bills or issues, if it turns out the bills are too complicated. And that'll be part of what we report back to the communities. Okay? And every legislator that we're reviewing will get one of these letters from us. They'll have a link to the survey online. They'll have the same deadline, and it explains all the context of what this project is about. All right, I know we're right at the end time, so I'm going to stop and ask if there's any questions, comments, feedback.
I have a comment
Yeah.
about, trying to keep it short, about the Wordle. Are the bill names the best source of data to use, or would the bill descriptions be better? Because the names themselves are not necessarily transparent for what goes without.
Yeah.
So for example, like university or
Mhm.
Troy,
Mhm.
it
I
just-
found that the best and fairest representation is actually if you combine the title with the description.
Okay,
So we're actually putting it all in,
okay.
the title and description.
And I had a second question. Would it be useful at all to see the top campaign donors as a percentage of the total budget for their campaign?
Yeah, I was thinking a pie chart might be better than a bar
Mm.
graph, but I know that you're working on that visual.
Yeah.
But I thought, yeah, a pie chart.
Pie chart.
Might be a better way to see how much they're dominating the campaign.
Yeah, I did. I actually did one version where it was.
Can you do a word cloud version?
Yeah. So that's the donors in a word cloud, but I don't know, it's kind of messy looking at.
Yeah.
Pie chart maybe better.
Well, the word clouds are, like, they're super helpful to organize tons and tons of data.
They're hard to compare to each other.
That also, right, because you don't, the size of the font is relative to the total number of pieces of data within the corpus of words. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's comparable person to person. So construction unions is really big there because it shows up lots of times within that data set. But it's hard to compare Choi with eGate, for example, because you don't know how big the data set is. So you don't know how many instances of construction unions there are.
Well, this is weighted according to how much they gave.
But that would be the same thing with a pie chart. I mean, you're looking at the percentage. So, I mean, the font size is still a percentage of...
So let's come back to this question of how to best visualize it, to compare it to other stuff. But as long as we have the raw data, then we can present it and we can figure out what's the best way to present it.
I think percentages are useful. Because it's sort of like
Yeah.
who are the biggest players, not necessarily how much money they're giving,
Yeah.
but out of all the players, who's the most powerful.
But what I'm hoping is going to happen as we do this, and it happened when I was doing Choi as an example, is you'll start to get an intuitive sense of like what this legislator found important, what they worked on, where their money was coming from, and you'll start to be able to form your own opinion about, is this legislator good, bad, connected to the community, connected to the donors, very independent thinking. Even just looking through the bill descriptions of what people have signed their name to is really pretty eye-opening. And the fact that one person introduced 86 bills, yeah, I mean it was.
Yeah, but Slom introduced like 300 bills because he kind of had to.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That might be. It would be interesting to see who introduced those bills of the people that we're looking at, if that says anything to us.
And I think it would also be good to create this for legislators that we know tend to be publicly interested as a control.
Yeah.
To say, what do their word clouds look like? And is it still, I mean, legislators who we know are busting their butts for their constituents, all of a sudden it looks like they're doing, so I mean, maybe that's revealing for us, but at the same time, like maybe it means that that we have to tweak it somehow, that what we're trying to show isn't, so I was
I don't
thinking
know. I
like,
mean, really what this is showing is how aligned are the legislators' priorities during session with what their constituents are saying.
no,
And
I
that's all-
agree,
and
and
that's
I
all
think
it's
it'd be
saying.
interesting to see the controls, like using our techniques,
Mhm.
would our controls, who we know, people, like good legislators who care about their constituents' needs, does this method show that.
Are assumptions based in?
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know that you can identify a control. Like, even legislators that we think of as good legislators, we evaluate legislators usually based on whether they're aligned with what we think the right legislative priorities are,
Well,
not whether they're.
We could randomly pick 4 other people to do it for them too, just to see whether or not we get results that are similar or something. We could choose someone at random. I mean, that would be a control as a random control as well. But I think that's a really good idea.
I mean, this is easy enough to generate for, dozens of legislators, so we can do that.
Well, I think of the 9 we have, we're not. The fact that we're just picking it based on their area, I think is important. So we are within those 9 going to get some that we might, feel more aligned with, and some that we might feel less aligned with. But if we're supposed to be this kind of nonpartisan, unbiased,
But there's a bias
You know.
in terms of the word cloud you're comparing it to within the community. So the community has said this is what the person did. So that creates a comparison that we're working within. What if we do it with somebody else we don't have that word cloud for, and then look at their campaign numbers or something like that to see, are we drawing the same kinds of conclusions about where their influence comes from?
I see what you're saying.
That would be helpful. Because we're doing this from the standpoint of citizen advocates. So our interest is in teasing out these potential relationships, and I think it's important to be careful that we don't do too much, or that we say enough to be able to qualify our information with, the same issues that come up with infographics, that we're not overly pushing the issue. Are we going to put information about what committees they're on?
We can put a whole bunch of other information. One of the things the group also recommended was to have a link that says, a link to a page that has a lot more information about that legislator and the issues that we asked them about. So we're thinking of incorporating reference that way. But I think even on the infographic, there's space for, so-and-so chair of XYZ committees.
Yeah, if we have their face, their district, maybe how long they've served, and then their committees or
Yeah.
something like that.
Because there's going to be a lot of gray area in terms of what committees they're on and how that influences their choice of posts and stuff. So
Right, that on some
the
level they're
issue
not
is
going
to cover over all that gray area.
In terms of demographic data that we're putting on next to the work portals or whatever, maybe what they do when they're not is for the rest of the year. Their other job.
That's true. Yeah, their personal interests, yeah. If they're doctors, they might care more about medical and health issues, even if their constituents don't.
And that tends to show up in their committee assignments too.
Good suggestions, thanks. We're 10 minutes over time, so I want to make sure we can get out of here.
Okay.
And the temperature's rising
I have
in here.
homework for you guys. Let me turn this off.